Because
Wow, it's 2 o'clock. We're actually live. So we're just going to wait for people to start showing up. And let me not stop you in your tracks, Caitlin. Finish off what you were saying. You feel comfortable.
that's okay. Yeah, I was saying I use my walking pad, my standing desk, like around 3:30 when there's that normal kind of slump.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives me a bit of energy for the rest of the for the end of the day.
Nice.
Very
But
cool. How do you
yeah,
try to track your steps? Because you probably can't use a normal pedometer, can you, with your
no, but it does track on the pad itself,
oh, that's
and
cool.
I'll manually add to my Fitbit if I have to. So I do try and track my steps.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I
I feel
definitely
like
recommend it.
I would walk off the walking pad, 100%.
Yeah, I do go pretty slow, so that like
Can you fold
I'm
it
not
up if
bouncing
you're
as
not
much.
using it? Like,
Yeah, it's folded just by my feet right now. Yeah,
Okay. Maybe
yeah,
I'll
it's
ask.
very cool. Yeah, I definitely recommend it. I just need to use it more myself.
All right. So this is the part where we are waiting to see panelists, well, are waiting to see who's coming in. So a few minutes of chit chat, conversation. It's a pity that we can't include the crowd, but that's all right. You can use the chat in the meantime, but yeah, let's wait a couple more minutes before we actually get started.
Yeah, our attendees can talk to us.
Yes, they
Please
can.
tell us where you're from.
Say hi.
Where is everybody? I'm in Brisbane. And it's actually nice today, nice weather. Hasn't been as disgustingly warm as it has been lately.
We've got Adelaide.
Adelaide, oh, nice.
Yes.
Thanks, Fatima. Hi. Melbourne. Yes. We've got Sydney.
Melbourne's not bad today. It's nice and sunny
Yeah,
outside.
it is nice today.
Yes.
It was really hot yesterday. It's disgusting. I don't want to complain because I want it to be warm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Even though it's officially
Keep the summer feeling for a little bit longer.
okay.
Brisbane, yes.
Another one in Brisbane. Yeah. Matt's just like looking to see who else is in Brisbane.
Represent.
They're my comrades. Brisbane.
Yeah. There's only 7 of us, so you know.
I lived in Brisbane for a few years for uni in St. Lucia.
Oh yeah? Oh, that's lovely though.
I love Deepak saying no, Melbourne. We've got New York. Hi, Michael Delaney in New York.
Damn.
It's
Might
cold.
be winning furthest dial-in distance.
Yeah.
All right, one more minute.
Sounds good.
Hello, Sam in Sydney. Amy loves Brizzy. Haha. Hello, hello. All right. Well, I'm really excited about today's session. I've been looking forward to this week, actually, the myriad of events we've had so far. And the only sad part is the ones that I can't make. So what I'd like to do firstly to begin this session is to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm hosting this panel discussion. And I pay my respects to their elders, past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples participating in this session today. Before we kick off, I just want to give a bit of housekeeping. You probably see there's a recording knob there. Yes, we're recording it. So that way, anyone that has missed a session, hopefully we can share it with them in future. Please feel free to ask questions as they pop up. Don't worry about, putting it in the chat. We will have a questions session at the very end. We will make time for that. So don't hesitate to do that or even share your thoughts as we're going along. We want you to actually be open and honest and transparent throughout the whole entire session. I know I'm asking questions of these wonderful people who I'm going to introduce in a moment, but the more you put in, the more we're all going to get out of it. The whole intent of this is to walk away with some insights and learnings that we can take away ourselves within our working environments. So without further ado, for those of you that don't know me, my name's Jo Ioannidis. I am a founding fellow of Striven, and I'm a big advocate of women and getting that parity and women in leadership specifically. It's one of the core missions that I have for Protoscience, and it is actually one of the key programs that I'm running as well. It's come to that point. I love anything to do with helping people get ahead when it comes to their career. So I'm now going to pass it to our panel members to give their introductions before I start asking them some questions. Over to you, Caitlin.
Cool. Hi, everyone. Really glad to be here. Just a bit of my background, my introduction. I am originally from the US. That's where the funny accent is from. I've been in Australia though for 13 years, and I've been in recruitment and HR type roles ever since then. More recently in tech, and currently a head of people at Budgetly. I also work for another startup called NoiseNet, and I'm a big fan of remote working and the transparent and open org kind of movement. I'm a big fan of pay transparency, and I know we'll talk about that a little bit today.
Fantastic. Thank you, Caitlin. I'm now going to pass it over to Matt.
Hello, my name is Matt. I'm up here in Brisbane. I'm the director of Foundation. So Foundation delivers compensation strategies to startups. So very much services that are hugely focused on enhancing pay equity and pay transparency. My entire career, I've spent leading people operations functions, and have always owned the compensation practice. And I think compensation is one of those things that's in kind of a golden era at the moment. There's a lot of attention, there's a lot of change. Obviously, just this week or last week, we saw the gender pay gap being released. So it's an exciting space to be in, and I'm glad to see that it's getting the attention that it deserves.
Absolutely, 100%. Thank you so much, Matt. I'm now going to pass it to Hannah.
Hi everyone, I'm Hannah. I was born and bred in Malaysia. Moved to Melbourne. I've been in Australia for about 8 years now. Moved to Melbourne 6 years ago. I, as you can see, am a brown female. I was born Muslim, so I have a real passion for DIB, and I work in recruitment now. So I work with a company called Catapult Sports. We are a sports tech company where we obviously have got the double whammy of being sports and in tech. So really trying to have more representation of women and underrepresented groups in during our recruitment process. So that's definitely something I'm passionate about. Can't wait to meet all of you and talk more about that stuff.
Thank you so much for giving indication of, where you're working, who you are, because really the intent is to get what's in your brains in terms of what your thinking is with this particular topic. And it's time to close the gap, isn't it? We need to really reopen this conversation and keep it going. The gender pay gap specifically has been a big topic of discussion, as you've all heard to, but there's still plenty of work to do, even in the sense of getting that representation, especially when it comes to leadership, especially when it comes to tech. And guess what? As we know, technology is always making advancements. It's not going anywhere. We're just going to get more and more into having to focus on tech and getting that representation, especially in leadership. So big topic of discussion. Now, recently, HiBob had given the Growing Pains report, and out of that report, they found that the current economic downturn is only causing the gap to widen, which is not what we want to hear. But conversations like this can help alleviate that and really help to prioritize it and move the dial forward. So I have the first question to ask you, and you can choose who takes that question first, but I'd love to hear your thoughts in terms of what your thinking is. So firstly, what advice, golden insights, would you give to companies wanting to build a solid foundation from the get-go to consistently implement ways of working to get that gender parity that can translate to policies that people just embed in their everyday, in the work environment? Who wants to go first?
I'm happy to give it a go first. Sure. So I think to help build a strong foundation that's going to provide a culture and environment where people of all genders, all types want to work. I always say transparent and documentation. So trying to be as clear in your policies and what they actually mean in practice, and training your managers on how to actually use those policies within their team. So always explaining the why behind what you're trying to implement, giving clear guidelines, examples. What is this like in the real world? Like, yes, it's a page of text, that's a policy, but what does that look like in real life? And giving them the proper resources to use. Having that clearly documented and outlined helps then also say, okay, these are the times when you should come to me for extra help, or if you're not sure. And I always say, when first implementing a policy, this is our starting point, because we want to learn and improve on it. So it might need to change based off of your feedback and actually what it looks like in reality. It might need to change as we get bigger, but give us the feedback, and then that's how we can improve as an organization and get feedback from the team and the managers on what's going on.
Yep, that's wonderful advice that you're giving there. So educate the leaders, and do that by saying, hey, it's okay to not know things, and I can teach you, and we can learn as we go along.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. Who wants to add to that or add their flavor?
Yeah, I can jump in. I'm a huge data buff. I think from my perspective, and this has been a lot of my experience as well, depending on the companies are very comfortable stating a position that they want to take about things like gender pay gaps or pay equity and important measures like that. But I think very few of them then follow that up with the measurement and the accountability and the actual action taken to move the needle and those sorts of things. So having some fundamental things in place, like a job level framework, so you can actually understand what it is that you're talking about. Are we talking about apples and apples? What does pay equity actually mean on a granular level, and how can we start to address that kind of challenge within our organization before making those? I mean, you should be making those sorts of broad statements anyway about what you're trying to achieve, but then actually taking the steps to implement it. And I think that starts to build trust within your employees as well, that it's not just a policy position. It's not just something that you're doing because you feel like you have to. It's something that you actually genuinely care about, and you're trying to, take action and move the needle on it. So that would be my first tip for how you can start to make change.
Yeah, I definitely agree. But the only thing that I will say is that sometimes it is easy to get really overwhelmed or intimidated by other companies that are already doing big things, and you feel like if you're being left behind, it is okay to start simply and start with one small DEIB strategy, for example, before going in the weeds and like really knowing, because some people don't already have the data. Some people might not already have existing things. And I think that sometimes, even as a recruiter, I get really overwhelmed, or I'm really scared because I don't really know where to start. So my advice is to build a solid foundation, is to just come up with your own small DIB strategy, and then using that policy to then look at all your other policies through that lens, whether it's a recruitment policy, a promotion policy, a career progression, your L&D engagement. But once you have that small step that you've taken at the start, you can then use that to implement on all the other all the other policies that you might have internally as well.
I love that, looking at it through the lens of DEIB. No matter what you do, that could be said for everything that you do in the business, not just, the hiring process. I like that a lot. Now, that's really solid advice to give to organizations. And, being in the hiring line, or even in a people and culture role, I feel it's quite instrumental to be the person that takes the first step to say, let's do this. And this is a way of going about doing it. I want to now reflect on the next question. And when I say reflect, I'm going to sort of give a little bit of a spiel and then ask you the questions. So now, thinking about it in the scenario, if you're sat in your seat, you have a leader in front of you, irrespective of whether it's someone that you're meeting for the first time or someone that you've known for some time, and they have a pain point they need to address. Say it is an opportunity, a role that they're hiring for, and they don't have enough women in the mix, or they may have a short list of women versus men, but the salaries are out of whack, which, to be fair, that's what the statistics show. So how would you go about briefing your managers and your senior leaders on this issue? And what would you give them to tackle equality concerns in that kind of scenario?
That's a really interesting one for me specifically, because coming from working in Malaysia, they have very different I guess, practices compared to Australia. So in Malaysia, what you have to do when you apply for a job is provide your 3 months payslip to prove what you've been earning, so that the recruiter can then say, you're earning 100K a year, we're going to give you 2 or 3% increase on that for this new role. Whereas in Australia, it's not like that, in my experience at least. In Australia, there is a job that is being paid a certain amount, like 120K a year, for example. Whoever applies for the job and is suitable for the role is paid that amount regardless. So in that sense, my personal experience has been that it is a little bit more fair in Australia when it comes to paying people what the role requires. And I've been in a position where I've had a female candidate from a different country that has immigrated to Australia for work, and had presented herself way lower than the salary that we were going to pay. So obviously the managers sort of got excited to see the savings that they were able to make by hiring this candidate. Now, obviously they didn't think about it like we're meant to pay everyone at the same rate. They were looking at the savings cost that they could make. And I think in your role, it is so crucial to be the person to start those conversations. And sometimes it can be pretty awkward when the company's like, yeah, we're going to save 30, 40 grand by having this hire. But if what we're looking at is we're hiring for merit, we're hiring the person for the job that they're able to do and paying them at a fair rate. So I think sometimes the conversation is not always easy, but based on my experience, a lot of people have been really open to receive those kind of feedback and start creating those conversations so we can pay people fairly.
100% aligned with that approach, Hannah. That's really great intel there. And yeah, isn't it interesting to see the different perspective with location in Malaysia versus here? And that's significant. But Matt, you know, you're in the kind of situation where you're advising and guiding startups to get things right from, you know, inception, if you like.
Ground zero.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'd like to hear what you have to share, and then I want to pass to Caitlin.
Yeah, so I mean, look, from my perspective, companies that allow negotiation, that process to unfold and dictate the outcome for individuals, whether it's coming into the organization or already within the organization, it's a recipe for bias. It's a recipe for disaster if you're looking at pay equity, because there's so much evidence out there to suggest that, you know, people aren't going to negotiate those things equally or fairly. And it's going to result in disparities. I think some of the most progressive organizations that I've done work with who genuinely care about this will take a no negotiation approach to salary. So if you're coming to work for us and we've benchmarked the role at 100K, if you're above or below that, we pay 100K. And so that might mean at the start of the process, you say goodbye to some candidates that you may have otherwise gotten further down the process with. But it's something that fundamentally undoes a lot of companies further down the line anyway. I mean, if you're saving a couple of bucks, you know, bringing someone in who doesn't know their own worth, it only takes one conversation between them and their counterpart who is being paid the right amount for them to suddenly lose all of their engagement and start to question whether or not they really want to be here and working for you. So from my perspective, it's a very short-term mindset. I'm always an advocate for an approach of very narrow salary bands, and I think if people are unaware of their own worth in the market, then it's on you and it's incumbent upon the employer to pay them what they're worth. You've got to remember as well, there's a massive power imbalance. Companies buy and have access to enormous amounts of data that is, you know, highly vetted, frequently updated. And whilst that's getting better from a consumer kind of private, you know, freely available and accessible perspective, it's not anywhere near the level of maturity that it is for companies. And so it's fair to assume that someone doesn't know that their worth is, you know, more or less within the market. But ultimately, it's something that the company can really own from a policy level if they genuinely care about it.
Yep. So in other words, be the change you wish to see. So the organization really has the front foot on that and are there to help support and guide people coming into a business. Now, Caitlin, I'd love to hear what you have to share about this.
Yes, I mean, it's a good segue because I feel like how we approach things at Budgetly as an example is very in line with what Matt just described. You know, we have the advantage that we've taken this approach from the very beginning. So that makes life a lot easier to do this, right? It's a different scenario when you're trying to maybe undo some bad practices, or all of a sudden that you're finding gaps and things. within teams, but we have taken the approach of transparency as far as we kind of wanted, in that we have salary bands internally open, available for all roles. So if I'm a salesperson, I can see what a mid-level engineer range is. But the thing that's really helped me the most, I mean, that's great. This is awesome. And it's helped us tremendously with budgeting and planning and figuring out where people actually are at and career plans. Obviously, that's a whole, like, you could talk about it forever, right? But the thing that I think has helped us the most, and me personally, is having the ability to advertise our salary bands on job ads. That has made the conversations with candidates so much easier. You know, whoever I'm talking to, I'm assuming they've seen that this is the range. I always double check, of course, but then it also becomes a conversation. Okay, this is the range. We're going to assess you through the process. And we're also going to take in factors of what we pay our team internally when we make your offer, and that's what it is. And we don't really negotiate that, because we care about keeping that pay fair across internal and when we bring in someone new. But that has made the whole negotiation process almost non-existent, but then really easy when we actually get to an offer stage. And it's meant that we've been able to have a very, very low gap. And hopefully now that means we can maintain that. If I was in a much bigger organization, I think one of the biggest outcomes I would try and get is to be able to get to the point where you could advertise salary bands on job ads, because I think that helps for everyone. Candidates of all types and whatever they're expecting, they know that this is the range that we actually do pay for that role up front.
Excellent. Now, I know I asked you a specific question. I asked you to reflect on it, then I asked you the question. So just to bring it all back together, you know, the way to brief and the way to guide your senior leaders is to give them the information up front, is to be on the front foot with that, is to be transparent from the get-go. And that's how you can alleviate the salary piece. But what about when it comes to equality concerns? You know, you're working on a role or an opportunity in the business, and you're looking at your dev team, because that's typically where it does happen, where you have the disparity, or your sales team. That also is an area too in a tech business. How do you address that with your leaders? What tools would you give them to help with that? Or what tools would you use in order to in turn help them?
I feel like this is where a lot of companies are getting are kind of explaining away their gender pay gap at the moment by saying, well, we just can't hire, you know, women into these sorts of roles. But then, you know, a lot of them aren't including explanations about what are, you know, the other things and programs they can put in place to try and remedy it. So yeah, sure, there is a finite pool of women within software engineering, without a doubt. But what programs are you putting in place to grow that function and to, you know, reduce and alleviate that pressure for yourself? So it's like, how can you be competitive in the market and use some of these tactics like no negotiation and a flexible workplace and stuff to be attractive to female employees, but then how are you also helping to grow the ones that you have into more senior roles and address your gap through that means as well? So it's, you know, it's the career conversations. How are you curating that career path for them? Is there an acceleration program because it's a strategic imperative? What are the ways in which you're, again, putting, you know, actions in place to address the gap for your organization, rather than just going, oh, well, we tried to hire and we only got one person and she wasn't suitable, and so therefore, you know, we're ticking the box, we're done.
Yep, some fair points there. So Caitlin, were you just about to say something in addition to that?
Well, no, I was thinking about the flexibility piece. And like, if you're having trouble hiring women, are you a place that is attractive to women? Do you have the type of environment that a woman would thrive in? Like, I think it's probably the bigger questions of how are you managing your culture and how are you creating an inclusive environment? And whatever you are doing or whatever you're putting in place to make it more attractive and a better environment, you need to be able to really relay that and communicate that externally to the female candidates that you're talking to. I think that's a key part. Like, what is it actually like to work here? If I'm applying to a bunch of different companies, and I can't tell what their parental leave policy is, or I don't know what flexibility means at this organization, it's going to be a lot harder for me to be able to actually like apply or engage or want to work at that place. So I think being really clear about what those policies are, what they mean, what they are in real life, what that practice looks like, is going to be important for attraction.
Some important points you've raised there about being a welcoming employer in the first place. Hannah, you were about to say something as well. I'd like to hear from you.
I was just going to touch on what Caitlin said earlier and a bit of what Matt said too, because I think as a recruiter, sometimes when you're recruiting for a role in software engineering, people are always looking for maybe fast and easy solutions to slot into their departments. So I want to hire a senior software engineer, but being realistic about where females are in the tech space, a lot of female candidates have just come out of doing a 4-year degree in university, for example, coding for the last 4 years or learning how to code in the last 4 years. So they're not really, have not grown into a role where they've had 5, 10, 15 years of work experience. So if you're really serious about trying to get more females into your organization, I think that companies need to maybe think about the seniority of people that they want to hire in the first place, because of course there are women out there that have been in tech for the last 20 years, but not all of them are there. The bulk of them are like starting to come in, they're junior engineers. So how open are you as an organization to hire people at that level? So that's sort of like touching on what Matt said earlier, but what Caitlin said is also really interesting to me, because when you think about being a company that's open to having or wanting to attract female candidates, there are some simple steps I think that in general companies would be open to doing, but not really putting it out there and being transparent about like, this is what we can do for you. So an example of that is like a compressed work week. Like a lot of candidates I'm speaking to, they're like, oh, I can only do 4 days a week. Or females that are coming back to work, they're like, I can only do 3 days. Are you open to part-time? And when they're starting those discussions, we're having those discussions with the managers, and managers like, yeah, I think we can do that. But we're not really at the start saying like, hey, when I'm advertising a role, I'm not already saying, hey, we can part-time applicants welcome, or like returning moms or whatever it is. It doesn't need to be returning moms, but a lot of times females have roles outside of organizations that require more of their time. So how transparent or how open are you to show that up front, to say like, this is what we can do for you to attract you, or to make it easier for you to apply for roles. The other thing that Matt said that really resonated with me personally was that career path and career growth within the organizations. There's a lot of women in their 20s and 30s that are potentially delaying having family or like starting a family because they're so, I guess, anxious about losing out on opportunities whilst they're in roles. You know, like men get sort of to become parents and still keep their professional development goals, or like still get to do that, but females suddenly have to think, oh, I have to stop this for 2 or 3 years to be a parent. So I love what you've said there, Matt, about thinking about the careers as well instead of just at that point of recruitment. So yeah, definitely some really great points there.
Amazing what each of you have shared. And just to summarize, you know, it's the career pathways piece is important, absolutely. But before that, like Caitlin mentions, it's how do you be that welcome employer and make sure that's visible and transparent from the get-go? But career pathways, how are you going to enable that support once they have joined? But also, if they have decided to go and have a child, how are you going to support them transition back when high chances are they're going to come back part-time? So you're going to expect them from day one to go, right, hit the ground running now. Like, hang on a minute, I've just walked back into this scenario and I need to establish, is my baby in a routine and can I focus on my work? So it's allowing the human aspect of, this is a changed scenario of that individual. They were a high performer before, but now that we've got to support them so they can transition back and smooth into it. And the career pathways piece is, well, if they're going to continue to be part-time and they're a leader before, are you going to let them continue to be a leader in a part-time capacity? How can you make it work for them? Because I see this scenario quite often. And sadly, a lot of women say, oh, I'm going to opt out from being a leader because now I need flexibility more so. And so, you know, I can't do this. And that's the sad part. And that is the very reason why we're not getting them to the C-suite. there's that sweet spot, you know, Hannah mentioned at a certain age, hold off, and then by a certain age, if you do want to have a child, it has to be a certain time frame. And then you don't want to be in the C-suite because you think you don't have what it takes because you're going to be part-time. So anyway, that's my little monologue. Before I proceed to the next question, I want to focus on the career pathways specifically when it comes to training and development. What ideas do you think, whether you've already embedded them or thinking about embedding them, or have an idea, you know, what kind of training and development can you offer, or should businesses, leaders be offering people to close that gender disparity and also, by default, close that gender pay gap? Who wants to take the stage to answer that first? Have a think about it.
I can go. It's just going to sound a little bit out there, but one of the things that I have done in previous organizations that had a really good flow-on effect that I think put us in a better position to implement. At that time, we did some career development plans, and we started doing levelings and transparent pay. So we're getting there, right? So, but I think the foundation that helped greatly was that we had all of our managers do training on what it meant for us, what feedback was like. How do we want to deliver feedback here? How do we manage career development? How do we coach our team here? And the really interesting piece was we trained everyone on emotional intelligence and growth mindset. So it helped bring awareness to themselves so that they could recognize in their own self their emotions and how they were reacting to things and their own kind of set views on things, so that they had more empathy when they were trying to approach issues with their team. And so that it did end up having that flow-on effect where it was a lot easier to have shared vocabulary about all of these things. And when faced with, okay, if we have an issue like a gender pay gap, it wasn't like you're doing things wrong or your team is wrong. It's changing that framing of it to, we're going to learn how to improve on this, and so we can all be better. So that growth mindset of, if you have a growth mindset for yourself, you can have a better growth mindset for your team. And as a whole org, we talked about growth mindset so much, and it was great, but it helped us get out of the mindset of things are either wrong or right. Let's try and make incremental improvements, and let's work together to get better and make it a better place to work. Full stop.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And I wonder if it's different depending on the demographic in your business, if they're later lifers, midlifers, or early lifers. It's very different scenario to have that mindset.
Yeah, it was confronting. It was definitely confronting and hard. But having kind of the CEO at that organization was great in really pushing this and believing in it, and that helped change a lot of the ways that we were working and made it a lot more of an inclusive place.
And I think that's the key. You've got to have that the buy-in from the CEO and the executive team from the get-go. Yes, I love that. Thank you for that, Caitlin. Who wants to give their take on that too? Matt?
Yeah.
And then you.
Voluntold. Yeah, I mean, look, from my perspective, this is a huge topic. I think as an industry, as a tech industry, we're seeing a massive shift from that kind of growth at all costs. You know, everyone's very focused on hiring from outside in, to now it's like, how do we keep our people? How do we keep them engaged? And I think something that time and time again, I think it either isn't being done well, or it just needs to continue to be a point that's hammered home, is like, how do you have these conversations internally and help your people move well internally? So how are you enabling your leaders to have career conversations where you can actually be clear and upfront and not feel like you're at risk of saying to your manager, I want your job, and any repercussions that might come from that? How do you have those sorts of conversations and then start to put an actual roadmap in place? And how can you in particular help managers get more comfortable with the fact that they're going to lose their people one day and that they need to just let them go? I saw a stat from Steve Gard from Circleback Initiative this morning, talking about how for every person that moves internally, 61% of them have looked at jobs outside the business. So like, your people are either going to move internally if you facilitate that, or they're going to leave and go work for someone else. So it's like, how can you help foster that? How can you make that a much more seamless process? Yeah, I just think there's such baby steps that still need to be taken before any of those bigger ones. Something that randomly popped into my head is you never hear about like shadowing anymore. I don't really ever hear about that as a concept. Why can't someone go and spend a day and week, with someone who's in a role that they want to try and be? I feel like it used to be this thing that was done probably a long time ago, but I just don't hear of it anymore. But just bringing things like that back, we probably don't have to reinvent the wheel. We just have to think about some of these really basic friction points that we can reduce that are going to ultimately unlock, talent mobility and enable more women up into more senior roles.
It's interesting that you say the word talent mobility, and I love everything that you framed there, because in my mind, my hallucination is that big enterprises, large organizations have this down pat, this internal mobility piece, career pathways, supporting women. So I assume they have programs. Then when we look at the smaller size businesses and startups, it's like, how do you know where to start, where to begin with that? And it's saying, hey, let's lift and shift some of the ideas from there to here right now and guide them and give it a go and try and see what happens and iterate as you go along. There's a question that Amy has asked, but I will park that till the end, but it's very important to ask that question. But I'm going to pass it to Hannah. I'd love to hear what you have to share in terms of your thoughts about, training and development and some ideas around that.
In Catapult, we haven't specifically done any training and development around gender pay gap just yet. We're still doing a lot of work and calculations, trying to get the data, figures, and sort of facts before moving on there. But we have started with doing DIB-related training on reducing bias when it comes to recruitment or promotions and stuff like that. And I think that there are obviously a lot of very deep, like the deeper layers on what diversity actually means, but I think sometimes bringing that to light on having those conversations in a safe space with your managers and the leaders of your organization around reducing the bias that you might even have. I think sometimes you don't even think about those kind of things when you're like busy doing day-to-day things. So we've started there, sort of starting really small and starting really simply, because again, sometimes in a smaller organization, having big complex things might not work from the get-go. So we've just started really small by trying to reduce bias when it comes to recruitment, but that hopefully will have a trickle-down effect onto us, making sure that we don't have any bias when comparing male and female candidates, and in turn closing that gender pay gap. Hopefully.
Yeah. And I love it because little incremental steps, as you probably have heard me and others say before, it all adds up, doesn't it? It all becomes a big impact, and that's ultimately what we want. Now, I want to ask each of you, reflect on all the things I've asked and all the things that you have shared, some important lessons that you have learnt on your road to achieving this, the obstacles that you may have faced personally yourself, the self-talk that you've had to give yourself, or, go and have conversations with your peers and other thought leaders. So yeah, in other words, what are the important lessons that you have learned that others could, learn from in turn?
I can say, are you about to say something, Caitlin? Do you want me to go first?
You can go.
Mine's a bit out there, but I think being patient, sometimes as a female employee, or just being female in general, I feel a lot of anger and frustration when data gets presented to me. Like, you look at something and says, 16% of women are paid less than men in tech industry, or something like that. You read something like that. The first thing that comes up is like, I want my 16%. Why am I paid less? Like, I'm so angry and frustrated with the whole system, I think. But trying to channel that anger into something that is useful sometimes it's hard for me to be patient and realize that it's not something that can happen overnight for me or other women out there. So, because sometimes you see the flip side, people get angry and upset and they just give up. They just don't do anything with that. So I think trying to channel those feelings and emotions into patience and taking advantage of that to see what we can do to try and make the change. It's a bit cliche. But also taking advantage of the fact that, like, where we are right now as a company, like if we're a smaller firm, like we're a startup or a scale-up company, we have less red tape. We can actually implement what we think is useful. We're maturing, we're reaching next steps of infancy, and that's okay, because we might not already do all the right things properly right now, but if we can make that change slowly, and if we realize where we are and we're open to having those conversations, I think that's what's important to me personally in my learning is that.
Firstly, there's nothing cheesy or cliche about any of what you have shared. I think it's quite poignant, and a lot of people will resonate with everything that you've just described. You've got to start small, you've got to think big, and you've got to just keep paving the way and being the example that others can learn from along the journey as well. So thank you. Great lessons. I'm going to pass it now to Matt. What are some of yours that you would like to share?
Yeah, I mean, just reflecting on my own journey and this, so the example I use is when I was young or earlier in my career, I remember how hard it was for me to feel like I could get paid what I was worth. And then I go, well, I'm in the HR profession, I'm white, I'm a guy, like I've got everything in my favor and it can still be challenging for me. And so I think, that plus the experiences that I hear from my partner, who, just some of the hardships she's had to face in her own career, those are the sorts of things that drive me towards trying to make it a better place for the people that come after us. But I'm just a big, proponent of transparency. I've seen what it can do when it's done really well. I've seen the amount of trust it can drive within an organization when, people understand why they're paid what they're paid, and they know that you pay fairly and consistently across the organization, or that you can talk to the ways in which the policies you're putting in place are actually taking effect and how you're driving an outcome. So from my perspective, and this kind of ties in a little bit with Amy's question, which is like, if you genuinely want to resolve this problem, then talk about it and open up. And no one expects you to be perfect from day one, but they do expect you to start making progress. But if you're just gonna, sweep it under the rug, eventually something like the legislation or the pressure from your candidates or from your internal employees is going to catch up with you. Because I mean, again, just last week, there's a level of transparency that is unprecedented for Australia. In Europe, we're seeing enormous changes over there. And in the US, we're seeing enormous changes there. Like, it will catch up with us. And I think it's those companies that are prepared to be the laggards that have the most to lose by not just saying, hey, here's where we're at, here's how we're going to try and improve it. Even if it is only 1% at a time, it's progress.
Thank you so much for being an ally, Matt, and to give your own take on it, your own story, your partner's experience, how important it is to you as an individual and the changes that you are going to make with those important lessons. Caitlin, I'd love to hear yours.
I was nodding a lot along with both of you. I guess just my own little take on this. I think what I've learned that has made the biggest difference is really always pushing for some sort of improvement. Always push for, even if it is a baby step. I have definitely found the most benefit from transparency and bringing that into all of our policies. If you're not talking about why you're doing something or what you're doing about something, people are going to fill in the blanks themselves. So you might as well be upfront about it. People can handle the truth a lot more than I think businesses think. We hire a bunch of adults to work for us. I think we can talk to them and treat them like adults as well. They understand why decisions are made, and they can, I think, have a lot more understanding than people think about, we want to do something, but we don't have the resources right now, or we want to get to this point, this is our goal, but it's going to take us the whole year to get there. Like, if they can understand the why behind it and hear that, they're going to be a lot more open to helping the organization improve as well, and being a part of that organization. So I think transparency about the good and the bad is really important. And I think being able to tell the story of what you're trying to do next makes a big difference.
I love that so much. Yeah, give guidance on how to do things the right way from the outset, essentially. Now, I've got so much I can add flavor to, and I could easily take this conversation and have another hour with each of you. I loved hearing what you had to share in terms of insights and intel. I'm now going to pass it to questions, starting with Amy's. And I know you've made reference to it, Matt. How common do you think it is that companies avoid putting new policies in place regarding the pay gap out of fear for being wrong or making mistakes?
Probably, I mean, any is too much, right?
Yeah. Yep.
I'm trying to think. I've seen employers pull back from a level of transparency that they were probably previously going for due to a score or something like that. So that I've seen that happen in real time. Yeah, look, it's uncomfortable, right? Like it's you're becoming accountable, which is a tricky thing, but it's also a really huge signal to your people about where your kind of allegiance is placed in terms of resolving some of the issues internally. So yeah, if there's anyone on the call that's like, oh, I'm not thinking about, I'm thinking about not doing this because it's scary. Like, yeah, of course it is, but it's that's how you get change. And I think ultimately it drives more trust and more engagement, and that's going to have way more wonders for your team than the opposite.
So don't be afraid, just take that step. And there are people, fumbling their way, trying to make it work for the better. If you're doing it from a values mindset where you're trying to do greater good, chances are, it's going to work out. It's going to be fine. But you've got to start somewhere. If you're not taking any steps,
values,
no progress.
Yeah, especially if you're values-based, right? Like what a great way to make your values on the wall become worthless is having them and then not doing the thing that you said that you were going to do. So yeah, especially if you're values-based.
Yeah. Do the others want to add to that?
Just that reminded. Oh, I was just gonna say that just reminded me, like, but one of Budgetly's values is we find wisdom in data. So that was one of the things that when we first were talking about pay transparency and the salary ranges being open, like, well, it's really in line with our values. Like, wouldn't it be weird if we didn't show the data behind our decisions on pay, just the same way that we show the data behind our decisions on everything else in the business? So yeah. I think that is a really great way to try and push your thoughts and action on some of these things.
100%. Would you like to answer that, or I'll ask Hannah, or I'll move on to the next question and you can answer that one. Yeah.
We have, yeah, sure. I'm reading it. Is that MD's question?
Yeah, so I'll read it out. We have all worked for managers who don't believe the pay gap is real, or even, well, at times, especially in the face of data. So what advice would you give on how to shift these anachronistic views? Of course, there's a long word in there from Michael.
I feel glad that I don't think I have been put in this situation before where I've had to present data to a manager and them not believing in it, at least not in my recent years. I do remember providing CVs to managers and them judging the person of the CV rather than the merit of the candidate, I guess. I was really scared and upset at first when I was being questioned about things that weren't related to the job, or I guess talking about data, facts and figures versus like personal, emotional stuff. What I did was I just escalated them to the right channels. And my advice is, if you escalate them and no one does anything about that, you're not working for the right company. Because it is really scary too, as a newbie or as a more junior, younger person in a large organization, sometimes to do something or go against the grain. And that was like, it really scared me. And I did end up escalating a person that refused to do what I thought was right. But they were dealt with, thankfully, in this case. So I don't think I have a direct answer for you, MD, because my answer to that was to escalate them. But I'm not sure if maybe Caitlin might have something.
I think you've said something really important, Hannah, and it's and it does connect back to what Caitlin and Matt mentioned about the values piece. Is if something is off piece, if someone's not being a good human, then that should be called out as a bare minimum, let alone, when it comes to gender disparity or, disparity when it comes to salary, period. So I'd like to hear from Matt.
Yeah, I think in those sorts of circumstances, it can be tricky, of course, because you're like, how can you not understand it? I think this is something that I've come to grapple with, because I can be like quick to get frustrated by an approach like that, like just this kind of blunt force, I don't believe in that. But I think an approach that I used to forget to take is like actually just trying to understand the position and just understand what it means, because I know that there's people who deal with things like gender pay gap on the regular, and even they sometimes confuse it. And so if there's experts that are misunderstanding it, then what chance do the rest of us have? So I think just coming from that place of like, oh, tell me a bit more about what you're thinking is there. And if you get to the end of it and fundamentally they just won't listen to reason, then there's a whole different problem around their ability to be data-led and informed around the decisions that they make. And if they're a leader, then that's even more concerning. And then, as Hannah said, there's an escalation issue there, or there's a time to quiet quit and find my next job kind of issue. But yeah, I think just coming from a place of seeking to understand is a good place to start, and see where you get to from there.
Yep, very good points. And Caitlin and I are nodding, and Hannah as well. And it does come down to, is your leadership team capable of having the right conversations in the first place? And, for Caitlin, it's, hey, we're offering them training on emotional intelligence, having that growth mindset. That's the key thing. But what if you come across a scenario where they've had the training and, it hasn't really done the trick? Then it becomes a different PMC conversation, but that's not for today. Caitlin, I'd like to hear from you.
Yeah, I mean, I think if this was a manager that I had put through growth mindset training, I would say you're having a fixed mindset about this.
Yeah.
And this is an example of when you have a fixed mindset about one thing. Having a fixed mindset doesn't mean you have a fixed mindset about everything in your world and your life, but all of us have tendencies of having more fixed versus growth for certain things about yourselves or others. So I would have used that training for this type of conversation. But if that wasn't the case, I think Matt made a really good point of seeking to understand. Tell me more. What is your thinking about behind this? Walk me through why you believe this is the case. What do you think we could do differently? Is there anything you're willing to change? Like having the conversation about it instead of just taking it at face value of, oh, they don't know what they're talking about, or they're being stubborn, or whatever that may be. But yeah, it is a tricky part, especially if they have data in front of them. Normally that's kind of, what you've got in your top pocket to be like, look, this is true. If you don't believe me, what I'm saying, here's the data. So if that's not even getting them across the line, that is a tough situation to try and continue to battle against.
Wow. Thank you, Caitlin. Yes, some really poignant things that can be taken as takeaways. And, Michael did say excellent answers. So thank you all for your answers on that.
It's a good, tough question for us.
I was going to actually say, it was a tough question, wasn't it? I was going to say we have time for more questions, but I don't actually think we do. But what I would love from the audience is just to write down in the chat right now, what's something that really made a difference to you after having heard these conversations? One word or one comment or one takeaway. Let us know in the chat, or you can come off mute and just share just quickly. Transparency is one of them. Thank you, Tim. Aligning action to values, planning career pathways to bridge the gap. Love the idea of growth mindset, training as a starter, the kindness of the guest, kudos to that. Yes, Ali, I haven't seen you in ages. Nice to see you in the chat. Trying and starting small is better than doing nothing out of fear or uncertainty. Yes, so much in that. So what I'd also like to do, if we are going to get any more answers there, keep pushing for change. Thank you, Michael, is to hear from the panel. What's one key word or takeaway for you that you got out of today that you've heard from, your fellow panelists?
I think the training piece is a big one for me, because even as someone that was that is like female, I find myself in the minority. Like, I'm not an expert, right, when it comes to DIBA. I never will be, because it's constantly changing. There's always something for me to continuously learn to be able to champion certain things in the organization. I think as people leaders, you have the responsibility or feel the pressure of knowing everything sometimes. So Caitlin, you mentioned growth mindset, and that's like your mind just has to keep growing and growing and growing basically forever, because you're never going to be in a position where you're like, yep, I'm an expert. Like, I already know everything, I can teach you. Like, you're never going to be in that position. So I think allocating budget to training or time to train people in the organization is a big takeaway for me.
Yes, 100%.
2 words for me: be restless. I think there's a lot to be done. I think everyone has to, be restless in pursuing the change that we want to see.
I can see you in a t-shirt that says that, Matt. Swag and send. Yeah, them.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Doubles as a workout shirt.
Yeah. I think like just keep learning and keep pushing. I'm in a standalone role at both companies that I work for, and I get so much value out of either being part of events like this or going to events like this, because it makes me realize, and it's a good reminder that there's others that are in similar positions, and we're all trying to figure this out. So I know there's great communities here that are there to help you and give advice and support. And I think we shouldn't forget that and reach out to people for their advice, or just to sense check things. I do that all the time, and that makes a big difference. And it can help you also bring back into your own org, like other new ideas.
Excellent.
I was going to add one more thing just about the
Yeah.
training for growth mindset. The training that I've used before is the Google New Manager training, and it's free online. So it's super helpful. It's really good, fully structured and everything, if anyone wants to use that.
I'm going to challenge you, Caitlin, if you have the link, we'll find.
Yeah, I do. I
Get those resources.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, Tim is asking that. Yes.
So it's called Rework. I'll just put it.
Excellent. Okay. So the link has been shared in the chat. Now I'm going to take a moment to thank each of our panelists. Thank you so much, Matt, Caitlin, and Hannah, for your insights, your intel. You yourselves are making a change and a difference by having these conversations, by giving these insights, by people asking the questions, and sharing the learnings that you've had from your own journey yourselves. And I think there's one key thing that I will say off the back of all of this. So much can happen when we all get together and come up with ideas, but then we are the ones that can walk away and be that change that we wish to see. So thank you everyone for joining us today. We would love it if you felt comfortable, share what the key takeaways that you took away from this session are on socials, and tag these wonderful panelists and Striven if you feel up to it. And without further ado, join the sessions that are continuing this week if you can, and enjoy the rest of your International Women's Day week. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Jo, as well.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, everybody.